In this video, I will be talking about 3-5, the distributive property. You've probably done the distributive property in your head without even really knowing it. What the distributive property says is that we can take a number, such as 18, and break it down into two numbers that add up to 18, such as 10 plus 8, and I can multiply that by 6 to make it easier. Once I've broken down one of my numbers into two addends that add up to 18, I'm going to distribute, which means to pass out, the 2 times to 10 and to 8. So first I'll pass out 6 times to the 10, and then I'll pass out the 6 and the times sign to the 8. So I used my 6 and my times and my 10 and my 8. I'm just missing my addition. I can add up these two products and get the same answer as if I had done 6 times 18 to begin with. Basically, I'm just splitting up that 18, and I'll multiply 6 by the 10 and 6 by the 8, and then add them together to make it a little bit easier. Then we can probably do it in our head. 6 times 10 is 60, and 6 times 8 is 48. When I add those up, I can get 108. Looking at 6 times 18 right off the bat, you probably can't do that in your head. But when we break it down using the distributive property, it makes the problem easier and sometimes easy enough to do in our heads. Let's look at another example together. I usually try and break up the harder number. So since 60 has a 0 at the end, that's not too tricky. So I'm going to break up this 45 into 40 plus 5. So 40 plus 5 times 60. So that means I need to pass out my 60 to the 40, 60 times 40, and to the 5, 60 times 5. And since here I have an addition sign, I'm adding these two things up. So now I can probably do this in my head. 6 times 4 is 24 plus 2 zeros, 2,400. And 6 times 5 is, 30. And add my 0 at the end. So 300. Now I can easily add up 2,400 plus 300 in my head to get 2,700, which is my final answer. Here's another example. In this case, I'm going to split up the 102, since that's a little bit harder for me, into 100 plus 2. I haven't quite used the distributive property yet because I haven't distributed or passed out my 16. So sometimes the problems will tell you to rewrite this using the distributive property. This right here would be the distributive property because I've passed out that 16 and the times sign. So right here, this line would be rewriting the problem using the distributive property. I passed out the 16 times to the 100 and to my 2, and then since there's an addition sign here, I put an addition sign in the middle. So basically, I'm just going to break it down into two smaller problems and then add them up. 16 times 100 is 1,600 or 1,600. And 16 times 2 is 32. I'm going to add those two things together to get 1,632 as my final answer. So you guys can impress all your friends by doing these really tricky looking problems pretty easily using the distributive property. You might be wondering if we can use subtraction when we're doing the distributive property, and the answer is yes. For example, 8 is kind of a tricky number. So I'm going to break that down into 10 minus 2, since 10 minus 2 equals 8. Now I'm going to pass out my 220 to both of those numbers. 220 times 10 and 220 times 2. Since I have a subtraction sign here, I need a subtraction sign in the middle of my two problems. 220 times 10 is 2,200. I just added a 0 to the end. And 220 times 2 is 440. So now that makes the problem a lot easier. I can subtract 440. So 0 minus 0 is 0. I'll borrow. 10 minus 4 is 6. I can't do 1 minus 4, but 11 minus 4 is 7. and 1 minus nothing is 1. So I can get my final answer of 1,760. By breaking this 8 up into 10 minus 2, it makes it a little bit easier to work with. I want you to go ahead and try this problem. I want you to rewrite the problem 7 times 32 using the distributive property. So what you're going to need to do is to first choose which of these numbers you will break apart, and then you will distribute the other number to the final two. So your answer should be kind of looking like this, with numbers filling in each of these blanks after you've rewritten it using the distributive property, and then you need to solve. So the first thing you need to do is rewrite the expression using the distributive property, and then you need to find the product. So for example, if I was doing the problem, 5 times 45, I would break up my 45, and I would have, so I'd have this, and then I can pass out my 5 times to each of these. So 5 times 40 plus 5 times 5. I'm going to put parentheses around these and see how this looks like this kind of. So this would be rewriting using the distributive property, and then I would just solve it. All right, good luck.